speaker. I always enjoyed coming to Canterbury. So, tell you about some research I've been doing recently. This, by the way, is for my own university. And I show this picture. It's not so important to show it here in a lovely place, but when I go to visit the Midwest and so on. Co-authored one is a colleague, Garrett is a colleague at UCSB, and Ian and she and Hunter is a graduate student who had taken a medical degree and then decided that it would be more fun to be a graduate student in economics than to be a doctor. And so he turned out he was a very valuable colleague for this research. The background of the story is this. For people that have leukemia and several other blood diseases, a bone marrow transplant can be a lifesaver, quite literally lifesaver. So these are people who would be certain to die, almost certain to die in the very near future. If they didn't get a transplant, they do get a transplant, they've got a decent probability of living a full life. So 5 and 10-year survival probabilities are of the order of 35 to 40%. People who last that long are essentially as good as new. So quite literally, they save a life. There's a good chance of bone marrow transplant to save your life. The trick, the problem, is that in order for a bone marrow transplant to work, the donor's got to be a genetic match for the recipient. Now, your best chance for a match is a brother or sister. But indeed, the chances that any given brother or sister is a match for you is only 1/4. And in fact, it turns out that only about 30% of the people who need a transplant have a sibling who is a match. If you don't have a match among your siblings, your parents and uncles and aunts and so on are not particularly likely candidates, not much better than a stranger. And I'll explain the genetics of that a little later. So instead, what's evolved is an institutional solution called National Bone Marrow Registries, which are going to be the object of much of our discussion. Now, to get an idea of the degree of complexity of this problem, let's take a look at some of the facts about the probability that two people will match. So if you take two U.S. citizens of European descent, the probability that two persons selected at random are matches for each other is about 1 in 11,000. For African Americans, it's even worse. The chance is about 1 in 100,000 that you'll match. This reflects a much greater genetic diversity in the African population than in the European population. Essentially, we believe because Europeans are a small, single, or descendants of a small tribe that wandered out of Africa, and they left behind much greater diversity in Africa. So anyway, the point is, your chances of finding of any one person being a match for you are very small. Completely different order of magnitude from finding a match for a kidney donation or a blood donation. Essentially, for blood donations, the people who have the toughest time finding a match are the O negatives, and about 7% of the population will match for them. So it's not a terrible problem to find a match, even if you've got a pretty rare blood type. For kidney donations, essentially the story is not much different from the blood. There's a couple of extra qualifications, but basically if somebody matches you in blood type, they'll probably be a suitable kidney donor. Of course, it's much more difficult to persuade someone to give you a kidney than to persuade them to give you a pint of blood. Yeah.
Can you have cadaveric bone marrow donors?
Sorry?
Can you have cadaveric donors, or you need to?
No. So the distribution of type sizes is far from uniform. Well, so about half of the people of European descent are types that have a frequency smaller than 1 in 100,000. Said on average, to me, the probability that two people randomly selected match is 1 in 10,000. That's because there are some fairly common types. But for many of us, we're in quite rare types. And about 20% of us are in types of frequency smaller than 1 in a million. And for African Americans, of course, there's even more diversity. So the institutional device that's been cooked up to solve this problem, or to ameliorate this problem, is what's known as bone marrow registries. The US has a bone marrow registry of about 4 million people. Various countries of the world have their own registries, and the total number of people in bone marrow registries somewhere in the world is of the order of 10 million people. There's a growing amount of cooperation between the registries and transshipment, so on. Particularly the Germans and the Americans have worked out a deal where they share fairly simply. And but I hope we'll have a little time to discuss that issue later. So what happens if you register? Well, what you do is you give them a little, spit in a bottle for them, give them a little bit of your saliva, and the registry will take your DNA type and record it, and they'll record your contact information. And you, when you do this, you promise that if anybody of your type should ever need if you're ever asked to donate to anyone, you'll be willing to do so, no matter who it is. This is not a binding contract, it's just a promise. You could back out, and the people do. It's kind of an interesting process. I watched this happen at a registry they were doing on campus at UCSB. They were focusing on Asian American students. And they had a little table where you could go up and talk to them. And they would explain, if you were interested, they'd explain in some detail about what the process was. Are you sure you want to do this thing? Explain that, in fact, we'll talk about donating is not a trivial thing to do. Are you sure you want to do this? And you would sign up. After you had said, I'm sure I want to do this, you were given a little piece of paper where you could secretly write, I didn't mean it. And the point of that was that they really don't want you if you don't intend to actually follow through. And there are, of course, you can imagine, there's some fellows who might go up there and say, I want to do it to impress Liddy, or to impress someone to be on the list. So this way you could impress your girlfriend that you signed up. Didn't really do it. So just what is the process of making a donation? Well, the traditional method is literally donation of bone marrow. And what happens is they stick a giant needle into your pelvis and jab around and fish around and dig stuff out. Now, you don't feel any of this because you were anesthetized at the time, and you were required to spend the night in the hospital. Supposedly, afterwards, you don't feel very good for a day or so. You don't feel bad, terrible, but you don't feel very good. A little sore. And then you're okay, assuming it all goes well. There's some chance that you don't wake up when you're anesthetized. There's always some chance of that. The German bone marrow website, the Germans have a website where they explain the process, and they describe how you feel afterwards. It's like you've been hit with a table leg. Now, I don't quite know well, maybe you can imagine. If you're German, you might. I guess maybe practiced in Germany, I don't know. The alternative method, which is becoming which is, I think, now becoming the majority. Both methods are used valuably, but this alternative method seems to be emerging as the more common one. Is what happens is they give you some drugs beforehand, a few days beforehand, steroids and things that make you produce more stem cells than you normally would. And then you spend an afternoon seated and you have the blood pumped through a filter back into you, and they filter out stem cells. And then they send you home. And you feel a little under the weather next day, supposedly. In this instance, it spreads some medical opinion. Well, the risk is you're messing with your immune system, which is not a trivial thing to do. The probability is very small that something nasty would happen to you, but can't be done. So essentially, it would be interesting actually to know. I'd like to do more surveys of people who've undergone this and say, well, how would you compare this to having the flu, to going to a faculty meeting, various sorts of misery that we might compare. That would be quite informative. But I haven't got that kind of information. What's striking is here, yeah.
Do they have to, does the one time when they donate, does it go to one person or will it collect enough to help others?
If there were more than one person that needed you at the time you donated, they could collect enough for more than one person.
And do they ever come back to you?
They could, yes. And occasionally do. Yeah.
So this is a non-storable commodity then? At the moment?
We do not store this stuff. I think it could be at some cost. I'm not quite sure of it. What they do, there's a similar technology which we'll spend a little time discussing, which is when a baby is born, they can collect stem cells from the placenta, and that they can refrigerate and store. And that can be used in essentially the same way as bone marrow transplant.
Because I just thinking for the polio research in the late 50s and the 60s, they isolated a set of cells everybody was working on. It came from one black woman,
right.
And then they cultured them forever and ever, and they're still being circulated around now.
Yeah,
and I was wondering,
I'm sure it's possible.
Okay. Yeah.
And part of what's going on, of course, is typically the number of transplants is really very small. It's a few thousand, so the order of 10,000. The chance that your stem cells will ever be useful to somebody else after they've been used are quite small. And so it's very expensive for a small gain. The efficiency suggests collect it when you need it.
And how expensive is the overall procedure?
Just
ballpark, 80,000, 10,000, 200,000?
The surgery and the whole works
Yeah.
is the order of 150,000.
And they allow no payment to the donor?
Correct.
But the doctors can profit on it?
Correct.
Okay, just checking.
Although there's an interesting qualification in no payment to the donor, a year or two after the surgery is performed, if it is successful, they'll offer both parties, if both parties would like to meet each other, they'll give them their addresses. So if you were rich and grateful, you might give something to the donor. And there are occasions where that newspaper stuff, but that isn't like selling, is it? So anyway, basically what's striking here, I think, is that you are undergoing a very non-trivial sacrifice to benefit somebody who's almost certainly going to be a complete stranger. You've never met before. And so this, I think, is interesting in ways. So the research questions that I want to consider in this paper, in this discussion, are the following. One of them is, can we do a benefit cost analysis to decide whether the current bone marrow registry is the right size? Too big, too little, so on. It'll turn out fairly convincing, you've got fairly convincing evidence that it's still too small. Another thing that we want to talk about is Well, just this remarkable phenomenon of this generosity, of this generous behavior. You've got 10 million people in the world that have agreed to do this other non-trivial contribution to a stranger. And so it's interesting to think about what motivates donors, and for those perverse people like economists, we like to think about, well, how would a rational person think about this problem? And it sort of arises in a very peculiar form of the free rider problem, which we'll discuss. And there also is some question about just, well, what is really the motivation? What kind of altruism do we have here? Yeah.
What proportion of people called turned down?
I'll show you statistics about that. Yeah, significant. A third.
Okay, so the registry is not really 10 million people, is it?
That's correct.
Okay.
And so then we'll talk about how one might achieve an optimal registry and would money payments be needed, things like that. So before we do that, yeah.
So do donors get higher priority if they themselves need to return a bone marrow?
No.
So even, okay.
In fact, there kind of isn't it, you know, isn't it like with kidneys where there are waiting lists? Here, typically, what will happen is there's only a small number of people who need these donors. Small relative, you know, there's the 10 million people in the registry. There's the 10,000 people that need surgery. They will. Everybody who needs surgery will be sent to the. You know, they'll be sent to look at. They'll look at the registry and see if they got a match there. And if you got a match, bingo, they'll do you. So, yeah.
Is the leukemia a childhood condition? Are these the people that 10 to the fourth?
It happens to people of all ages. So it's not the distribution of these diseases is not so very different from the age distribution in the population.
Okay, thank you.
Would there be anything stopping something like life sharers from taking on bone marrow?
I don't know what life sharers is.
Oh, it's a club of people who agree to donate their organs, but only to other people who have joined the club.
There's no similar institution at the moment. My guess is it wouldn't be an efficient institution in this case, but you can think about that. So, to understand some of the things we're going to do, it's helpful to understand just a little bit of genetics. I thought, you know these books, Brain Surgery for Dummies and Computer Programming for Dummies. I thought of writing a book, Sex for Economists. So in this book, we would describe individuals as, individuals are run by little computer programs, and your computer program is contained on two strings. And on these strings, there are little balls. These strings are matched up against each other. And what happens is you get one of your strings that tells you what you're going to be like from your mother, and you get another one from your father. And when we make a new person, mother puts together a string from her material, some of which comes from her dad, some of which comes from her mom, and father puts together a string from his material, and they somehow, which we won't discuss in economics, put those strings together and create a new person. Well, that's diploid sex. Now,
You don't have any graphics of this, do you?
I'm very good with anatomically correct stick people. If
Okay,
really
thank you.
draw And even stick sheep, I can even draw stick sheep. But, so, now your immunity system is what is going to determine whether you will accept material from another person. And basically, you better be a match for this person in in 3 different spots. In fact, so think of the 6 balls that are contained in 3 loci here. You better have exactly the same 6 balls as the other person if you're going to be able to accept his bone marrow, or your bone marrow. So, in order, for example, to be a match for your sister, it better be that you got the same string from Dad as your sister got from Dad, and the same string from Mom that your sister got from Mom. And if you did, then you'll be a match. But that happens only with probability 1/4. Now, we've got one more thing we want to. Oh, now you can kind of see. You can see probably pretty quickly why your Uncle Louis isn't likely to be a good match for you, unless your mother and father are sisters and brothers. Your Uncle Louis is not going to be likely to have the same stuff on both sides, even if Uncle Louis is your father. Now, we call either one of these strings a little bit of vocabulary is helpful here. One of these strings is called a haplotype. Now, the way in which we learn, we already talked about that, the fundamental data that I'm going to use to do this study is estimates of the distribution, probability distribution of types in the population. And so those numbers I gave you about the 1 in 11,000 and 1 in 90,000 and so on, those come from estimates of the distribution of HLA types, of immunity types in the population. And where do those estimates come from? Well, in fact, they come from the bone marrow registry, because where do we have a large sample of people who've been tested for their HLA type? In the registry. Well, at the time the research we're using was done, there were only about 2 million people for which they had good enough data to know their types. And when you think about it, there are, say, about 10 million types with non-trivial probability that you could be. You got a sample of 2 million. Good enough samples. 2 million sounds like a big sample. Isn't good enough for this kind of research. The biologists did a very clever thing. They said, well, look, suppose we could estimate the distribution of haplotypes, single strings, and suppose we assumed that mating was random with respect to your DNA type, then we could produce we could estimate the distribution of haplotypes of full 6-packs of balls. We get a much better estimate of the probability distributions of the rare types and so on. And so they do this in a very clever way. Essentially, when the DNA readers assess what you got, what's in your 6-pack, okay, they are able to tell what 6 kinds of balls you have. So, for example, in, say, this location, there maybe are 40 different things you could be in this one, 40 things you could be here, maybe another 100 you could be in this spot, another 100 you could be in this spot. So, but for each individual they look at, they can assess what does he, they know what you've got in each, what 6 walls you have. They actually don't know how the strings run through them, so they can't tell whether you're this rather than this, but they do know what 6 walls you have. And that's all apparently that seems to matter for compatibility. So what they do, knowing the distribution of these 6-packs, they do a maximum likelihood estimate of the distribution of haplotypes. And so instead of 20 million things to look at, we've got the square root of that. Okay, we've got a few thousand haplotypes. And so that's what they've estimated, and they've published these estimates of the distribution of haplotypes. And then it's pretty easy to use that distribution and reconstitute the distribution of full 6-pack. That's what we did. So we used the distribution of haplotypes that's published. We reconstituted the distribution of diplotypes.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
For those that you do have an observation, do they match the estimates? The actual probability in the sample, does it match the estimate? Or do they not do the estimate for the ones that they have?
So what they do, their estimates are the best, the maximum likelihood estimates for the sample they have. So they didn't have another sample to.
Okay, right.
Okay, so they couldn't test it out of sample. Now, would be interesting. That research was done maybe 6 years ago. There's now a much bigger sample. It should be redone and rechecked.
I would worry that if you end up finding that altruism is heritable and there's genetic correlates of altruism, then you might end up not having a sample that matches the population.
Good. I wouldn't worry so much about the disease of altruism as the disease of leukemia being correlated with your genetic HLA type, but I could be wrong about that. So what I want to talk about then, the first bit of our project, which is the benefit cost analysis, essentially looking at would it be worthwhile to spend more money gathering bigger registries? And one of the things I like about this particular benefit cost analysis is it's one of these examples where there's a lovely veil of ignorance, in a sense, that symmetrizes the benefits from increasing the size of the registry. Why is that? Because each of us faces some probability that we ourselves or one of our loved ones might get leukemia. And that probability is not much different from one person or another. None of us know, hardly any of us know our HLA type, whether we've got a common type or a rare type. So for us, notice what is the public good that comes from increasing the size of the bone marrow registry? Well, essentially what happens if you make the registry bigger, it increases the chances for each of us that we would find a match there if we should need one. Okay. And that benefit is not so very different across the population. Even, as I said, even by age, the age distribution of incidence of these leukemias and blood diseases is not so different from the population at large. There is, of course, difference by race because of the difference in we can discuss that. So essentially, this sets us off on the way to a rather straightforward benefit cost analysis. Essentially, we can calculate the effect of adding an extra person on we can calculate the probability that adding an extra person to the registry saves a life. And so that's going to be a very tiny probability, isn't it? But then saving a life is a very valuable thing. And so saying it another way, adding an extra person to the registry adds a tiny increment to the probability that any of us would find a match. That's a very tiny probability, but there are a large number of us, potential beneficiaries, and for each of us the benefits, a big number. You would pay a lot to know that your life would be saved. Okay. So this is a problem that public finance economists are rather familiar with in many contexts. What we call it the value of statistical life, and the idea is, the concept is simply this. Let's say it 2 or 3 different ways. One way of saying it is this. If the public authorities are acting rationally and consistently, they will choose all life-saving policies that save lives at a cheaper cost per life than some minimal amount. They'll have some cutoff. They'll say, we'll save lives so long as saving life is worth this much. If it costs more than that, we just can't afford to do it. And that sounds hard-hearted, but it's necessity. It's a necessity. There is no way that you can value lives at infinity. Another way of saying it, another kind of simple way of thinking of this, is to imagine, say, a public project that would maybe straighten out a road. Imagine this road is one that on the average kills 1 person per year. Okay? And so straightening out the road would save 1 life per year. Now, suppose that 10,000 people use this road. Okay? And we don't know which of their lives is going to be saved, but it's going to be the life of one of these 10,000 people. So effectively, fixing this road adds 1/10,000th to the survival probability of each of 10,000 people. Suppose that you were willing to pay $100 to reduce your risk of death by 1/10,000. It's not very much, but $100. Then, how much money could the authorities collect to fix the road? Would people be happy to have it collected? 100 times 10,000. Is that a million, huh? Okay. So, if that were the case, the value of statistical life would be $1 million. Well, $100 is probably less than you would be willing to pay. You'd probably be willing to pay maybe 1,000. Maybe. Well, with the Americans, from various surveys, the estimates are that the value of the statistical life is about $6.5 million US. And that number is put together from a number of different kinds of estimates. Some of them are surveys of exactly the kind I was suggesting to you. How much would you be willing to pay? And ask you to reduce your probability of being killed in an automobile accident in the next year from the current level of 1 in 10,000 to 0. And we ask people questions like that in surveys. We also look at people's behavior. How much are they willing to spend for this or that improvement, safety improvement on an automobile or on a bicycle? And try to ascertain it this way. They look at wage premiums for taking different jobs, another way of getting dangerous jobs, another way of getting estimates, and so on. And these estimates vary a good deal, but it's not as much as you might think. I mean, they vary on the order of $1 million US to 10 million, 12 million US dollars. And the median of these estimates is $6.5 million. That turns out to be the number that the Environmental Protection Agency in the US uses as its standard for what's it worth to save a life. And so that's the one we're using. As you'll see, we could, if you want to use a different number, we could recalculate our estimates very simply of the benefits. So now, the next bit of thinking we have to do is this probability bit. So, as I said, adding somebody else adding a new person to registry, what it does is it increases the probability that people will be able to find a match. But how exactly? It's not so trivial because, of course, it may be that adding an extra person to the registry just adds duplicates, somebody who's already there. And the bigger the registry gets, of course, the more likely it is that a new person is just a duplicate. Well, it's kind of a neat little probability calculation. Very well, neat is simple, that's why it's neat. So it goes like this. So we know the distribution of types. In fact, for each race, I should have said that the statistics that we had, we have separate statistics for Black Americans, European Americans, Asian Americans, and so on. Unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have separate statistics of this kind for, say, you might like to look at Spanish and Scandinavians and Japanese and so on. We don't have that. These are the ones we have. So the probability that if you are of type I, well, first of all, let PIX be probability that you are of type I. If you are of type I, what's the probability that you do not find a match? Well, first of all, let's suppose you're type I. What's the probability that you don't find a match among Caucasians? Well, it's going to be 1 minus pi Caucasian to the number of Caucasians in the registry. The idea is this, this is this whole probability problem that if 3 hunters shoot at a duck and the probability that any one of them hits it is 1/4. What's the probability that the duck is shot or is not shot? The probability is not shot is 3/4 cubed, right? And so on. So if I don't have no match, it means person 1 is not a match for me, person 2 is not a match for me, and so on. These are independent events. This is the probability then that I have no match among, say, people of race X. If I have no match at all, that means I've got no match among whites, no match among blacks, no match among Asians. So it's just this. What's the probability then that I have no match at all? Well, of course, this is the conditional probability that I have no match given that I'm of type I. Now, I run over all the types I might be and say, well, I'll take that probability times the probability I have no match contingent on being that type, and so on. So we have these little, relatively simple formulas for these probabilities. Now, at one time, when I first started doing this research, I thought, oh, well, we're going to have to make some simplifying assumptions about the distributions and do some clever stuff, and that'll be fun. And I got a ways down this road and doing clever stuff. Got, oh, how clever I was to do that. And then we said, well, wait, we've got this data, and it turns out, first I thought, oh, well, this data, yeah, but it's, it's a vector of 10 million elements. The probability distribution is, there's 10 million types you could be in, and you can't calculate that. Hell, you can't. MATLAB will do that. So you can calculate all these things. You can literally calculate these things in seconds on a laptop. Yeah.
Ted, trying to think about these probability calculations, like both the formulas of the 2 bullet points are conditional on X. Your ethnicity group is X. So, but in practice, I'm sitting there. I mean, it could be totally wrong, but my dad had leukemia. So I'm sitting there thinking, or my mom, or Uncle Louie, and I'm sitting there, I believe that I have leukemia. So it's like this sort of, what are people, the guys who are selecting in and out of this, they're going to have beliefs, or they may have, who knows?
This is certainly true that we will have differing beliefs about the probability of getting leukemia.
Or they'll be of a particular type. Maybe like, oh, my dad found out he was a, he's a six-ball guy with green and blue, and I'm.
You happen to know your dad's type.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Most people don't even know that.
But if you have a disease, you go out and find it. I mean, if.
Once people start knowing their types, it's true, they'll.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, given that kind of thing, we can make our calculations. So here's some of the kinds of numbers that are of interest. So these numbers have to do with the U.S. registry. We double a lot of these things if we're talking about the world registry. So one fact, so there are about 4.5 million Caucasians, U.S. Caucasians in the registry. Here's a question you asked: how many of these guys are actually willing to do it when they're asked? So it's willing, able. Well, you can find them. They're willing. They pass the medical tests and do it. Okay. About 65% of the people who are asked actually do it. So the effective registry is only about 2/3 of what the real one is for whites. For blacks, it's much worse. Only 1/3 of the people are available, healthy, willing to do it, and so on. I don't know why. Anyway.
They don't code in whether it's like they can't find the person because they've moved house, because I can easily imagine that people, that propensity to move house.
I've been trying to get the registry to tell us. I think they know it, but so
okay, so it's not going to be moving house then.
Yeah, it would be very good to know that, but at the moment I don't. So anyway, making those calculations, here are the probabilities given the current registry that if you were, say, Caucasian, you will find no match in the registry. About 8%. If you're African American, probabilities of the order of 40%. These are calculated from the distribution. They are they're pretty consistent with the historical records of when people are looking, when the doctors are out looking, how often do they find a match for the people they're looking for. Again, I don't have good numbers on that. I have older numbers which were consistent with this.
Does transfer between siblings happen outside of the registry? So if your sister isn't on the registry, would she still be approached if you had a problem?
Let's see. Oh yeah, sure. They'll start with your brother and sister whether they're on the registry or not. That's right. One thing somebody asked me, which I thought was a good question too, was suppose they ask you, suppose you're on the registry, you turn out to be a match for me, the only match, and it turns out that you are pregnant and can't donate, or you refuse. It would seem that what they should do then is ask your siblings, because your siblings have there's a good chance your siblings are matches for them. I don't know whether they do that.
So if you had a sibling match, you'd never show up on the probability of a match table that you've got there.
No, this is from the registry. Yeah. So 30% of the population of the needy people have a sibling match. So this is for those who do not.
So if you're in a group that has an average larger number of siblings, then you could do better by relying on that than worrying about.
As long as you're confident that they're full siblings, not half siblings.
He lives in California, okay?
Right. Given these calculations and so on, we can calculate marginals. We can calculate the gain from adding a register. Essentially, I have little formulas for the probability of finding a match. I can find the derivative of those formulas with respect to the number of persons of any race. And then, so that when I do that is the derivative of the probability of finding a match for someone of that type. Now I have to worry about how often do I need matches. Essentially, I say, well, let's take how many people are seeking a match in any year, then the number of matches that actually occur are the number of people seeking matches times the probability that one of them will find a match. And so I can calculate the expected number of additional matches that result from recruiting an extra registry. But not every additional match saves a life. Sometimes the patient would have survived anyway with the next best treatment. Sometimes he gets the match and dies anyway. Okay. So we, this is where our physician co-author really earned his keep. Actually, he earned his keep in a lot of things. He was also an excellent mat lab worker, but he worked painfully through the medical literature, disease by disease, and estimated the probabilities of survival with a match and without a match for each of these diseases. And at the end of it, we estimate that about a fifth of the people who get matches are literally have their lives saved. That they're alive and healthy 5 to 10 years later, and would be dead if they didn't have the transplant. So the number of lives saved, we can then calculate the number of lives saved. We also have to do some other kind of calculating things. Remember, we got to annualize things. So if somebody joins the registry, he's going to be in there for several years. In fact, a registrant can stay in the registry until he's 61, then they boot him out. He's no good anymore. Is the median age of people who join the registry is 35, so we assume that new registrants are in the registry for 25 years on average. Now, of course, if they recruit a college student, he's in there for much longer. And then, of course, the benefits that flow from having a person in the registry are, some of them come later. Yeah.
I'm just curious, once you make the decision to go in it, is the default that you stay in it, or is the default that you be out of it unless you take the effort to renew every year?
The default is you stay in it. They, at least it's, at one stage, they were sending birthday cards to people. The device, of course, was a good device for making sure they had your address correct. And probably also, if you've changed your mind about belonging, they'd like you to get out. Because it's a terrible thing if you're one of the few matches for somebody, they sign you up, but many people out. Imagine how demoralizing that would be. But yeah, the default is you stay. And that may be part of the reason why so many people are not available later on. So only 2/3 of the people who may have been more generous when they were younger and they're old and nasty, or who knows. So when we do all those calculations, we try to do everything carefully, we get some values and the benefits from an extra registrant. And the orders of magnitude are like this: $1,200 for a Caucasian registrant. What this table is the benefit from the registrant in the column and the benefit to the population of this group in the row. So, for example, an extra African American registrant is worth a total of $3,000 to the African American community, but he's also worth about $1,000 to the whites. And in fact, this number is as big as it is relative to this one because, of course, there are many more whites than blacks, and also, of course, because the borderline between blacks and whites is by no means accurate. So many of the people who have rare types among the whites, quite likely it's because they're carrying some African genes that. So that they may find a match among blacks. At any rate, this is the kind of thing. So things to notice. So sort of notice this number is a lot bigger than this number. In fact, so is this one and this one. Native Americans, it's about the same. Actually, it turns out it appears that the genetic makeup of the Native Americans in the bone marrow registry sample is pretty much the same as that of whites. I suspect that's because these aren't a random sample of Native Americans. If we got that on the rest, we would find people with.
Do these reflect the size of the group here? Or
all of these are taking account of the size of the group. So, yes, right. So why is a Native American donor useful? He's only worth $37 to Native Americans because there aren't many, but he's worth $1,000 to the whites because there are a lot of them, and so on.
Okay, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. So that's benefits. What about costs? Well, the bone marrow registry people tell us that the cost of running the tests and maintaining the records are about $100 per register. I'm a little suspicious that they don't know the difference between marginal and average costs, and that marginal costs are much lower. But there's no way, of course, that you can talk to these people and extract such information. The thing we've got to think about is costs, is that if you do produce an extra match, that means you have an extra surgery, and that costs money. And it's not completely trivial because not every surgery saves a life, too. Some of them are just expenses that so on. So we take into account those costs and do our calculation. We can guess you have to do some probability calculations there. Taking all these things into account, oh yeah, the other thing we have to worry about is that not every new registrant is actually an effective registrant, so you have to register 1.6 Caucasians and almost 3 African Americans to get an effective registrant. And so on. So we calculate all those things, and now we've got a little benefit cost table. Here are our estimated benefits, our estimated costs. With these, if you believe these numbers, there's a very strong case for increasing the size of the registry. Strongest case for doing so with the African American populations and the Asian populations. To do it, but it seems a good case for doing it for everybody. We can actually calculate optimal registry sizes. It turns out that this payoff function is a concave function of the registry sizes and so on. And so we can use just computational methods of finding the optimum. There's real kind of things. There's going to be a unique one, and we can find it. And these optimal sizes look like this. So for whites, it's about 2.5 times, almost 3 times as big as the current registry. Currently, the registry is about 2.7% of the population who are age eligible in the registry. We need about 7%. For blacks, we need about 24% instead of 2.5%, and so on. The probability of not finding a match would be reduced. If we had an optimal size registry, would be reduced as follows. There's an interesting thing here. I'm going to have a slide that. So notice the difference in the optimal. The blacks are still going to have a much higher probability of not finding a match than the whites in what I'm calling an optimal registry. It's not a Rawlsian sort of outcome. The reason there's a difference is fundamentally the difference in diversity of HIV types across the races.
You mean HLA?
HLA types, sorry. Yes, right. And and in fact, just to dramatize this, suppose you were truly Rawlsian and you wanted to enforce equality. By the way, there's a lot of rhetoric of the registry people that they do want equality across the races. If you wanted to enforce equality, to achieve equality, well, the first thing you do would be to sign up all the blacks. But in fact, that's not good enough. You'd have to start eliminating some whites from the registry to get equality, which would be bad for whites. But you know, it would also be bad for blacks, because there's some cross-matching. It's kind of one of those stories where the strict Rawlsian would be deeply troubled by this. So, the next issue that arises is the kind of benevolence, the motives that might underlie donors or people in the registry. What makes them do it? So the standard model of voluntary contributions to public goods is certainly not going to apply here. For one reason, in the standard model, people contribute to the public good because they themselves will get some benefit out of it. There's one thing that's certain with this public good is you, if you join the registry, are not going to benefit yourself. You know, if you get leukemia, it's going to be no comfort to you that your name is in the registry as a potential donor. The other feature of the standard model is that different individuals' contributions are perfect substitutes for each other. This is very much not the case as well. It's very unlikely that you and I are the same HLA type, and hence it's quite unlikely that my contribution and yours are perfect substitutes. On the other hand, it's not out of the question. And in fact, in a big registry, there's in fact a very substantial probability that you are not the only person of your type in the registry. Now, this brings up what seems to be kind of a peculiar free-rider problem. And it takes this shape. So essentially, if you join the let's suppose for the moment that you are a nice enough person that you said that if you were told there's a stranger whose life you can save by making a bone marrow donation, will you do it? Suppose you're the kind of person that would say, yes, I'll do it. But now, that isn't really quite the question that arises with will you join bone marrow registry? Because if you join, it may be that you're the only person that could save a life, but it may be that there's somebody else like you of your type in the registry. And then what have you accomplished? You'll just save somebody else the trouble of being the donor. In fact, well, we'll do that. So I want to, in this situation, you know, when religious people ask, what would Jesus do? So we economists ask, what would Homo economicus do? Okay. So how would he behave? Well, I'm afraid he'd behave rather badly. What? You? Stranger? Bullshit. He wouldn't do anything. So that's not very interesting. Yeah.
I'm going to turn this around for you pretty quickly. Say that I am selfish, but I get a little bit of smugness benefits from signing on. Make me feel like a good person on the net, especially I'm better than these other assholes that don't sign up. Okay? The expected cost to me of being a registrant are pretty low if I'm white, pretty high if I'm black. Okay? There, solved it.
Yep. No, I mean,
you just have some first mover, some initial stage, and then after that it's all explained.
We'll talk about
okay, cool.
that. Huh? Okay, no, pretty much done. So I want to talk about making this guy a little nicer, but still leaving with many of the qualities of economists, namely being highly rational and calculating. This is the kind of person your mother doesn't approve of. So we'll call him a consequential altruist. Consequentialist altruist. He's not Eric's person yet. We'll get to Eric's person. This guy cares about the patient's outcome. He doesn't care about social acclaim or credit for it or anything else. He just cares about what happens to patient. So, of course, this fellow, if someone else can save the patient, of course, go ahead. Yeah, why would I deprive you of the pleasure of being a donor, you know? The only case in which this guy, the consequentialist, would want to donate is if he knew, well, is if he were pivotal, in the sense of being the only one of his type. Or to say that more carefully, since we don't know whether you will be pivotal or not, there's a probability that you will be pivotal and a probability that you won't. And we would calculate an expected utility. That's the way we teach, that's what we teach you guys. And so let's just imagine, suppose C is the cost of donating with a thought experiment. Think of this as how much money would you have to pay me to make me undergo the inconvenience and pain of making a donation? Okay. And let B be what it would be worth to me to save the life of a stranger, to know that I had saved the life of a stranger. And I'll assume that B is bigger than C to make this an interesting story, so that you would donate if you knew you were going to be pivotal. Now, you will donate only if, okay, so now the probability that you'll be pivotal is something which we can calculate from the data we have. It's not a trivial thing because why? Because it's a conditional probability. Suppose I'm asked to donate. Well, from that I can get, what can I guess? I'm probably of a fairly common type because somebody is a match, somebody who needs a donation is a match for me. I'm probably of a fairly common type. So there are probably other guys in the pool that do it. But of course, the fact that I was asked means that maybe there weren't so many after all, because they presumably draw one. So you see, it's kind of a complicated calculation. Again, I thought we would do clever things with distributions and stuff. Just calculate it. Get the numbers, we calculate it. So we know this number, and of course, essentially, this consequentialist altruist would donate if the probability of being pivotal times the benefit if you're pivotal is bigger than the cost. And so, well, these probabilities of being pivotal if asked actually are the same as the probability of not finding a match in the registry. Because if there's a match for you in the registry, there's somebody else who could save the sick guy. So here we have those probabilities, and so essentially, say for Caucasians, the probability is about 1 in 10 that you're the only match for the guy. So, and for African Americans, the probability is much higher, it's 80%. So now, think about Caucasians, and noticing an optimal registry, this probability is even lower. So now, is that plausible? Well, it seems to me, I realize that nobody knows these numbers, but suppose they did know the numbers, could we expect to maintain as big a registry as we have? I think it's not out of the question. Remember, we're not asking for the behavior of the average guy. We're asking for what are the nicest 3% of the population like, or what are the nicest 10% of the population like. It might be that economists don't know any of these people even, but would require, say, the most generous people in the population, 3% most general, to think that the benefits of saving a life are 10 times the cost of undergoing this donation process. That's not out of the question at all, I don't think. I mean, it's not unreasonable. Certainly, well, it doesn't strike me as unreasonable that people might think that. Now, there will be others who think the cost would be terrible. There will be saying, and so on. See how that's we don't go. Of course, to have an optimal registry would be harder. You'd have to have the most generous 7% think that the benefits were 30 times the cost, and so on. So it might be harder to maintain an optimal registry. course, there are other motives. This is a non-consequentialist friend here in the yellow t-shirt. You might want to sign up and be able to tell other people, look, I'm in, or even tell yourself. Maybe you're not even persuaded that you're a good guy. You want evidence that you're a good guy. Well, you know, the probability that a registrant is ever asked during the time he's in the registry is only 1%. So you might want to sign up, and then if you call, you say, oh shit, I didn't mail, I wish I hadn't. Of course, if you're a ruthless sort of person, you'll say, oh, well, I won't do it. You might be a person who's ridden by guilt on that occasion, and you do it anyway, but you're sorry. But ex-ante, it's still a good bet. 99% of the time, you get to be a good guy without any cost. So I think there's lots of behavior like that. If you ask a non-economist, decent person, they'll laugh at you when you try to describe the dilemma I posed. They say, well, I do what's right. It doesn't matter if there's somebody else who could do what's right. I'll do what's right. When I've done it, it's me. And if you read the reports from people who have made donations and their self-satisfaction when they made the donation, the last thing that ever seems to occur to them is, well, maybe somebody else would have done it if I had done it. It's me, I saved this person's life. Let's see, it is interesting that the U.S. Bone Marrow Registry is really not trying very hard to recruit whites anymore. In fact, if you want to donate in the U.S., you can do so on the web. You just ask for a little kit, and you spit in the kit and send it off. But you have to send them $50. So you have to pay $50 to donate. For minorities, that's not true. You don't have to pay anything, and they work hard to recruit you.
Have they done any work looking at the differential recruitment costs by race?
No.
Just curious if that's optimal or not.
Right. I'll give you some hints on that issue, maybe. So my first thought would be, well, okay, so get an optimal registry. An optimal registry has to be much bigger than it is. It's going to be harder to recruit because you'll have to go from the nicest people to some less nice people. People will start to be aware that they're not so likely to be pivotal when the registry's big and so on. But first step would seem very simple. Provide enough funding so to pay that $50. The second step, seems to me, that would be very effective is tell more people about it. They aren't recruiting, they aren't trying. So I asked the class of 360 students at my university how many had ever heard of the Bone Marrow Registry. About half of them had. Now it's true, of course, that in fact, maybe I should have asked the same questionnaire, how many have heard of marginal cost? And a lot of them haven't heard, have been in the presence of the news but not heard it for lots of things. But basically, it strikes me these would be some of the best prospects, right? They're college students. They're going to be socially minded. They're young. They're healthy. They'll be in there for a long time. This is where the recruitment efforts should be strongest. And they really haven't talked to. They can't have been recruited very hard. There's some very interesting numbers of looking at different countries' national registries. So in Israel, about 10% of the age-eligible population belongs. I think the most striking one is Germany, with 7%. In Israel, I'm told that when you're in the army, your first day in the army, they ask you, do you want to join the National Registry? And when you're asked anything on the first day in the army, you say yes. The answer is yes. Sir. The Germans have about 7%. They probably do the same thing in the army, but they don't have both boys and girls in the army, and not everybody's in the army by any means anymore. They simply recruit much more vigorously. I plan to learn more about just what they do, but notice that this is about the number that I said was optimal. So if other countries could match the Germans in their performance, it'd probably be pretty much optimal solution. So of course you're looking for Z here. This is kind of a standard pattern, standard European pattern. The English do a little better. Taiwanese and Hong Kong do a little better than U.S. Of course, China, India, Mexico, Africa, Russia, hardly anybody, almost nobody. And just to make New Zealanders feel good, let's see the Dutchman, Dutch. Everybody knew the Dutchman would do good to Switzerland, Japan.
I'm still not taking the lead.
I certainly wouldn't want to have this needle inserted to me if I was in India.
Pardon?
If I was in India, I don't think I would like that needle inserted. But I'd feel better if I was in Finland.
Where was Finland? So I put you just in Scandinavia, is that all right?
That's all right.
I know the Swedes are not in Scandinavia, but
yeah.
So let's see this. That's enough.
Wondering about the lack of payment to the poor buggies who actually have to get the needles stuck in
Yeah.
or in India. When the normal story you see for body part donation is that there's good reasons to not do it by payment. One, we don't want to live in a society where poor people feel pressured that they have to sell their bodies in order to live. We've got to guide. Two, if you take something out of the realm of good citizenship and into the realm of the market, then all of a sudden a small increase in the price actually reduces the supply. Third, the people who are induced to give for money might actually be the people who don't have very good bodies. So you change adverse selection, and the last one is just moral repugnance of having trade. But if you have payment only if you're called upon to serve, you would pretty much eliminate all of that except in a very extreme form of repugnance. So why don't they do that?
Well, my own guess is that doctors object to paying anybody but doctors. One could argue that that if you were to pay people, they would no longer feel this pleasure of saving lives, and you're depriving them of this.
You could give them the option of giving the money back.
I agree.
There is quite a literature in psychology on exactly that point. Marcus will lecture you on it in great detail if you ask him. I won't. But I didn't think. I was just warning you.
But I mean, but this seems to be different because there's two-stage thing. You're signing up to be a volunteer out of the goodness of your heart. If it comes to pass that they're going to stick a needle up your backside, then there's a little bit of compensation at that point, and only at that point, to induce you to not have wasted all that money keeping you on the registry all that time, to induce you to go through it.
Just make it a lotto ticket. Make the payment big enough that you strictly want to be on the registry.
Isn't it almost like you kind of mentioned in the beginning that it was a lottery, that there is a chance that you have donated to a rich person and they will give you something? So in that sense, so in that sense, that there might be a private.
How about giving people a choice? If you want to receive as a donor at some point, you either have to pay a lot or you have to have been registered as somebody willing to donate.
Problem is
that way you don't pay.
You still turn down, and you've got a low probability at the point that you turn down of being. Say that you register at age 18, and then you're called on at age 50. What's the probability of needing it before death? It's a lot lower than it was at age 18. You turn it down because it's still going to be a high cost.
Well, it could be a a sliding scale of how much you need to pay too.
You know, these things would kind of appeal to the economists, but they ain't gonna work with that one. There's this famous notion of, occasionally been tried with fire companies, the fire engine. So if you join the society, they'll come and save your house if it's burning down. But if you don't, you're under no obligation. Okay. It's not credible. And occasionally it's been tried. Terrible. People are just not rational about that. I agree with Seamus about. I can't imagine there being very much to be said against making substantial payments to people who actually do make the donation. Doesn't seem to be anywhere near the kind of policy that's discussed in the letter.
I guess my point's not really to you, it's more to Seamus, although you just said you agree with me. I don't see how the idea that you pay people only if they have to give gets around that idea that you will be crowding out some intrinsic motivation, because when you're at the time of signing up for the registry, if they say to you, oh, well, don't worry, if you actually end up having to give it, we will give you lots of money, well, then already you're canceling the idea that I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart, and instead it's becoming a compensated transaction. So I think you do get that crowding out of intrinsic, even if it's
just put a tick box. Just put a tick box that I want to be paid. Don't call me unless you're going to pay me. Put that tick box, and then if you're hey, somebody needs something, they've got a list of people who could give it. They'll ask the altruists first because they're cheaper, and then they'll go to the folks like me.
And because you can choose not to take the box,
that's right.
Nothing's being
But these things about non-market versus a market transaction versus a social obligation transaction. Even when we have a draft, we still pay the soldiers.
Yeah.
We just don't pay them as
But we
much
don't pay
as
them
when
enough.
we make a market transaction.
Yeah.
There comes a point where this payment, which is compensation for pain, having to take a couple of days off, and so on, which means it's not something that you would do for the money, but at least it is. It's like paying, I think it's Peter hit the pound, right? It's not something that it's not enough money to actually give supply to the work.
Well, you could say cost reimbursement.
Sometimes I think so.
You could have cost reimbursements, which somehow sound different than.
Yeah.
One thing that might work over time as DNA testing gets cheaper. There are outfits like 23andMe and a few others that for about $1,000 will give you a full genetic workup and all of the diseases that you might be prone to. If you're having to do genetic testing anyways on these guys, once they're doing the haplotype checks, the marginal cost of doing a full workup isn't going to be that much higher.
Yeah,
It'll be a bit higher, but it's not going to be a huge amount higher. And if you've got benefit, their net benefit ratios are much greater than the cost of doing it outright. Then just give that as a side benefit for signing up.
Just kind of following up on that idea, one of the reasons that I would be reluctant to participate in these kinds of scheme is that providing them with some spit. And their one use of the spit is to find out what my HLA type is. But in that spit is every other component of my genome.
Yes, right.
And I'm wondering, what the heck are they going to, what are they going to do? Where's the credibility for them to confine it to the HLA thing? And so it's more like a risk calculation.
You're worried they're going to clone you?
Not me.
What crimes have you committed that you're worried that they will now be traced back, John?
I can't confess, okay? Besides, it might be coming back on my mom or my dad. No, quite seriously, I think if this is part of my credit card, I don't like giving away my credit card details. I'm kind of reluctant to do that. And this is like, my credit card details are in my spit. They're in my whole genetic history's there. And I mean, who's going to do something with it? These guys are going to use it for finding out whether I'm going to be useful for leukemia. Somebody else might be doing it to get promotions in their biological classes. Who knows what they're using it for?
Well, you wouldn't want to leave your beer glass behind.
That's right, yeah.
suppose you've got a situation where there's an excess demand for transplants, as quite often is. How's the bone marrow currently allocated? Is it allocated in a way that would make the use of, say, representative value of life saved data applicable to the population that is actually getting access?
Well, let's see. I mean, essentially, there isn't excess demand in the usual way.
No,
that is to
I
say,
agree with that. Yes.
somebody's needing it, they'll look, if they find a match for it in the registry, you'll get it. And even if two people need it from the same person, well, the same person can apply enough for two or three, I suppose.
Right, I mean, I understand this is relatively rare, but there must be occasions where somebody wants a bone marrow transplant and can't find a donor in the registry.
That's right. Yeah, right. That's
Now, the question,
yeah.
okay. Then how's the bone marrow then allocated? Is it first come, first served?
What do you mean
Is there age? Is there age?
Just matching.
No, I mean, if you got no match, you're screwed.
I understand that.
I guess I don't understand your question.
Oh, okay, no. I now understand it.
Okay, yeah. So you're not quite literally completely screwed because they'll take kind of the next best match, but it ain't very good.
Oh, okay.
I hate to kill the discussion, but it's my job. So thanks very much.